Hey all. Um, this one's going to be a bit of an experiment of sorts. Rather than creating a bit of a wall of text and just posting it up, I thought I would do a little bit of a voiceover through a video, part to help me get my head around the orientation of all of the wars and everything, but also to make it a little bit more interesting for you guys. So I'll give it an apology straight off the bat. This is kind of unedited and unscripted, so there'll be a lot of ums and ahs and a little bit of jumping back and forth. But as I said, it's kind of more to get a little bit of an idea of where things are going and refresh it in my mind. So, what I'm really trying to do today is have a look at the scene of the first Librarium Terra book, which is the Warzone for Helix cluster. So, the Helix cluster was one of the first subsectors to be built in the Oz30K website outside of Savage Reach. It's a first generation substyle, so the map needs to be updated to the second generation aesthetics, and all of the systems inside it are also probably first generation or second generation, and so need to be updated to the third generation style, which is a lot prettier for the book publication. So that'll be happening over the next couple of months and that sort of stuff. This particular expansion was built by Sir Robbo1. He was the person who helped me develop the website. He laid a lot of the coding and he built a lot of the initial systems and subsectors, laid the groundwork for me, and then taught me how to kind of go on from there. So many thanks to him. The Helix cluster itself was always intended to be a frontier subsector, somewhere on the fringe that had only just been touched by the Great Crusade before the Heresy started. So, with that being said, all of the systems were always intended to be largely independent worlds. So, either rogue human settlements or Xenos empires that hadn't been brought to compliance. That was kind of the rule of thumb for anybody wanting to launch events into that area. Um, so one of the earliest events that did use that area was the home of the first global heresy. That was basically Global Heresy Zero, which was at Calaran. Calaran was a far-flung system containing human settlements, and it came under attack from an orc migration. There's a side story of how the orcs were being pushed out by other kind of wars that were happening, both Imperial and Xenos. But the main story was that the orcs were migrating through this area and were attacking the human settlements. The Imperium was just in the subsector at that stage and sent relief forces. So the first global heresy campaign was largely focused on some coordinated Orc versus Imperium battles, and these were largely played in Europe and Australia. The large majority of them were played in Italy, where they had a very large Ulanor gaming community. So there was a lot of gaming reports from that area. So there's lots of development work required for this one because this was a very, very early kind of event. So there wasn't a whole lot of information recorded. So it's likely to be a boxed out history article. So this all occurred before the remembrancer who's writing the book arrived into the subsector. So it's kind of a historical, this is what happened when the Imperium first got here type thing. The next event that took place in the subsector was at Alentos. This is basically the middle of the subsector. I'm also trying to slow down my talking now. I've gotten a little bit less nervous. Um, so Alentos was made by another member of the community, and to be perfectly honest, I'm unsure of where in the world they're located. So my apologies for that. But a lot of the systems are actually populated by event organizers and groups that are scattered around the world. And I honestly wouldn't have a clue where they're from. I only see a username. I'll often receive an email asking for help to set the system up, which is what happened to Alentos. They followed the theme of that system for the subsector, so it was largely an Imperial versus Xenos setting, and it was actually prior to the Heresy, and it fits perfectly with the theme of the first Librarium Terra book, in that it's got an involvement of a rogue trader settling on the planet and such like. So that'll kind of fit in really nicely with the narrative. It will more than likely also be another historical article, rather than being a focused chapter, um, largely because I don't know a whole lot about the events and the results. I've got some battle reports. I'm in contact with Shane and that sort of stuff, but it was quite a few years ago, so we're kind of just going to flesh it out as much as we can. I'll make some heraldry for it, update the system, and we'll kind of have a little bit of a feature article on it in the book. So the first major chapter of the book, after the introduction to the Helix cluster, will then move on to what's basically known as System ALNH 1574. The lore surrounding this system is that it really wasn't a system of any interest. There was a gaseous giant, and that's really about it. So it's home to the lost Arc Mechanicus Galahad, and it was the scene of Active Heresy 3, which had about 60 players, and it was the first Active Heresy event that I ran that had captain teamed events. So basically, captains would be nominated often from the results of player votes from the previous event, and those captains would then go away and they would form their own team, and they would bring that team to the event. So the event wasn't necessarily just an open event, and it wasn't an invite event. Like I didn't do the event, the invites. I selected some captains, and then they built their teams up. So how they built their teams up was up to them. Some captains kind of did open invites and said, okay, I'm putting together a team, who wants to come along? Others selected. The entire point of it was to try and assist with the management of the event. So I was running an event by myself with 60 odd players over 2 days, trying to get all of those players to do what they needed to do in addition to submitting their reports and all of that sort of stuff. Had proved problematic in the previous event. So this was a mechanism to try and help me manage the event, and also to ensure the players would turn up to the event, so you wouldn't just have last minute dropouts, but also that the players would work as a team and enjoy the event as a team together. So you didn't necessarily have 60 randoms just kind of interacting and going, okay, well, I played 4 other players and that's it. You would have your team that you would interact with, and then your team would interact with all of the other teams. So there was a lot more of a social aspect for it. There was some criticisms of it being kind of an invite only, but unfortunately it worked for me. We had 60 players. It was a sold out event 9 months prior to it happening, and it ran quite smoothly. Sorry, I kind of diverged there. The the system itself only had the planet, a space station, and a ship. And the event was a bit of a unique setup in that it wasn't on a planet; it was completely void-based, with games taking place on the inside of the Ark, on the space station, which was close by, and even on the actual outside of the hull of the Ark, which was one of the unique tables. So that was a Centurion game on the outside of the hull, where explosions could blow infantry off. Explosions that penetrated the hull would then impact Zone Mortalis games on other tables that were representing the inside of the hull. And those Zone Mortalis games could call in reinforcements via Dreadclaws, which would kind of land Dreadclaws on the Centurion table. So there was a lot of table interaction during that event. And there was a large lead-in story, which was chopped up into like 20 pieces, and they were scattered throughout the event in various terminals throughout various tables. And the players during the events could investigate different terminals, and they would be awarded with like a sealed envelope with a fragment of the story. And they would then kind of try and piece together what actually happened, why the ship was there, and any clues as to where to go from there. That was a bit of an experiment on my part. A couple of the players put the entire story together, but they couldn't kind of get the clues early enough to have them impact the event type thing. That was a learning experience for all of us, but it was a really fun event um, from my point, and hopefully from the players as well. The second system, which is going to have a major chapter in the book, will be Kerabi. This is the entry point to the Helix cluster, and it's the only system which was under complete Imperial control at the time of the Heresy starting. So this planet, or this system, was the scene of a year-long campaign played in Canberra on our monthly events. And it was actually the continuation of the story arc, which started with Act of Heresy 3. And it would play out all the way through to Act of Heresy 5 and the Stilling of Bateth. So it was kind of at this point that I'd really decided to continue the story that we'd set up on Galahad, the Tomb of Galahad, the event there, and really started planning out a narrative and a story arc for all of these continuing events. So the Kerabi ended up with, I think we had a total of 24 or 26 unique players over the course of the year at monthly events. It was a map-based campaign, and we kind of played around with a couple of different campaign character progression mechanics and that sort of stuff. So towards the end of the campaign, it was the revealing of the Necron's presence in the Helix cluster. So they didn't actually interact with the campaign at all, but it's just at the end of it that was kind of the great revelation. So Cyaris was the scene of Act of Heresy 4, and it was intended to try and cast a different light on stories. It was a follow-up of a failed compliance action, which was impacted by the commencement of the Heresy kicking off. So it was different in that I'd really tried to kind of set the scene that this was an Imperial loss from the beginning. So the event was focused on trying to effectively evacuate the world before it was totally overrun. It wasn't one of conquest. It wasn't one of, okay, which faction is going to win control of this strategic place. It was trying to get their resources out before they lost complete control of it. So again, this was an act of heresy. So this was a teamed event. We had put the numbers up to 80 this time, though, because the team mechanic worked really, really well. So again, the team captains were selected from the various winners from the previous event, which were kind of player voted, best narrative, best painted, all of that sort of stuff. They then went and picked their team. However, this time I tried to start doing some of the secret plot hooks a little bit earlier. So this is where the sloth surfaced, or the maggot men, with about 3 players out of the 80 being selected prior to the event to be under the sloth influence. So they were given secret missions, they were given a sloth model, and they were given a series of envelopes. They could infect other players via a couple of different methods. And so over the course of the 2.5 days, they were kind of challenged with do whatever kind of side missions you want, but also keep in mind that your sloth is trying to infect others. So the players took hold of this and ran with it really, really hard. At the end of the event, we had close to half the players were infected, and some entire teams were overrun as well. So it was certainly far more than I was anticipated. There were more players infected than I had models for. I didn't anticipate that so many players were going to get infected. So it really influenced the end narrative in that the sloth basically took over half of the Imperial forces that were on the planet. And it was really fun for me watching the overall story eventuate over the 2 days, and I could see that a lot of the players really had fun running with it. I know Tim and Michael and a few others just had an absolute ball with it. So Jay, I know he's Princeps in his Adeptus Titanis got taken over, and yeah, it was a good fun run. DFOS is a system which really didn't get expanded. It got destroyed by a powerful missile strike from Cyaris. So that was kind of one of the winning team's kind of rewards as to where they wanted to launch this missile strike, and that sort of stuff. So I need to give some background lore on the actual DFOS system, but that it'll tie into the overarching lore and narrative of the Eldar versus Necrons fight that goes on throughout the Librarium Terra book, as hopefully you'll see in a few months. Then move on to Interroga. Sorry, while in Cyaris as well, there are a number of local campaigns, both in Melbourne and in Canberra. They were the year-long campaigns on there. Again, very isolated factions fighting in overrun territories, trying to find their way off. So in Interroga, which is the scene of Active Heresy 5 and the last in a series of events, the players were, or the Imperium's, drawn to the system by a high-ranking warning beacon. For this one, we had over 100 players playing a variety of formats. So it's the biggest event that I've ever run, and it was pretty huge. So we saw an extensive pre-event set of activities set up for this one. So this included scouting missions, and a lot of players initiated side quests on their own. So in the lead up to the event, I set up scouting missions. So we had like 60 odd territories mapped out. Sorry, I think there was 12 territories, and then within each of those territories there were like little mini territories. So during the course of the previous few months on it, the teams could send out scouting missions, and they could work out what was on the ground in those areas, and they could decide upon a landing zone. Because for this particular event, the teams themselves were setting the tables up, and they were going to be their home-based tables. So they got to decide some of the special rules for those tables and how those tables looked. So the scouting missions gave predetermined elements. So there might have been a radiation leak, or there might have been energy spikes, or additional resources. As they scouted around the areas, they could then, through a series of kind of mini comps, choose their landing site and pick a territory that they wanted. There were also a series of hidden treasures and kind of plot hooks and that sort of stuff scattered around. There was a total of about 20 different plot hooks, and we used about half a dozen of them, but they were fun to set up. So before that even kind of finalised, though, an entire group of players formed their own secret cabal. So like representatives from different teams, they got together and they decided that they wanted to hunt down another player, Jay, and created a unit of veterans, each from a different legion. This unit was then given to each of Jay's opponents over the course of the event with a secret mission envelope. So they had to try and kill Jay's warlord or stop him from achieving certain things. At the end of the event, the members of the Cabal then presented Jay with the unit as a gift, for kind of trying to screw him over and being a good sport about it. So it was a pretty memorable moment. So it was really good. So a huge number of the player-initiated arcs as well are what led to the Stilling of Arteth and that storyline. All of that, the enslavers, all of that sort of stuff was generated from their actions outside of the immediate game mechanics. So this particular event had a lot of clue cards, little story arc plot hooks, and after the main events on like Saturday, you would see clumps of players huddled round, exchanging information, trying to work out clues, setting up things, doing things, trading, and it was a really fantastic event socially, even with 100 players. So while it was the largest events that I've ever run, it was also one of the most involved storylines and interaction from the players. So I really, really enjoyed it. It was a kind of a good sending off for the Active Heresy series. Um, and then leading on from that, we go to Barteth. So while not technically in the Helix cluster, it will be the epilogue of the book's story arc. So it's the scene of the current global heresy and is forming the last chapter of the book and the lore of rogue trader Gabriel Calathetos. So that kind of then wraps up and kind of finishes the story of the Eldar versus Necrons, which is the underlying kind of story arc and drive of a lot of these sort of things that people really didn't know about for a couple of years. Um, so that's kind of the lay of the land, so to speak, of what I'll then be trying to flesh out in the next few months. I've got to go back to the start, and in that order, I'll start refreshing things. So refresh the entire Helix cluster, and then do the Calorian map, enter the information in, and kind of start building it out. And from there, I'll then write write the narrative and start tying it all together. Um, Throughout that, I'll then start inserting special characters from the events and that sort of stuff that stood out, and put in some filler information. But yeah, that's kind of a bit of a summary of where I'm going and what I'm trying to do. And while I've been speaking, I will have kind of done some heraldry and some maps and that sort of stuff, so you can actually see the heraldry and the badges that I'll be talking about. They'll be expanded into a similar style that you saw in the prologue. If you haven't seen that, I kind of recommend having a look at the prologue. That's an example of where I'm going with all of this. Um, and yeah, so I hope you've kind of enjoyed this kind of format of an update. It's certainly helped me get my head around things. I've made some notes while I've been saying this, so I might do a few more on different things, some different artworks, and that as I kind of do focused on different events, and we'll go from there. All right, guys, thanks very much for your support as usual, and I hope you enjoy future posts. Cheers.